Jagmeet Singh weighing in on the federal budget, which was tabled just under a week ago. He says his party hasn't yet decided on whether to support the budget. The Greens and the Bloc and the Conservatives have decided to vote against it. So the NDP support is pretty necessary. The Globe, meanwhile, is reporting that the Liberals hope to get a big punch out of this budget. And we've been talking about that for weeks with how many announcements they made in anticipation of actually tabling the document. We also know, though, according to the latest data from Abacus, that they will have their work cut out for them if they do want to swing the polls by about 5 points by the end of June, as the Globe is reporting. Here's what the latest Abacus poll shows us of committed vote intention for Canadians. 43% of those polled would vote Conservative, 23% Liberal, and 18% NDP. Let's bring back the front bench to talk about that. Sabrina Grover, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone. Kathleen, let's start on the NDP and is there any possibility they don't ultimately support the budget? And the concern, by the way, that Jagmeet Singh raised is a very valid one that advocates for people with disabilities have been talking about. Like, it amounts to $200 a month. Is that really something that anyone can live on? Do you think that that's enough to prevent them from voting for the budget?
Well, I'll tell you what, when you're thinking about whether to support a budget or not, there's a lot of considerations. But I'll tell you that the Bloc and the Conservatives have already written themselves out of the story. We know how they're voting. They're not going to be, journalists aren't going to be probing them for questions or talking to them about their issues in the budget. So Jagmeet Singh and his team are going to take some time. Certainly the disability tax credit is a concern. So are some of the public service cuts that were mentioned in the budget as well. But they also know that there's lots of great things in the budget that they want to support. For instance, free birth control for 9 million Canadians, or some of the diabetes medications and tools that are needed for close to 4 million Canadians. So I think the caucus will decide. It's a non-House sitting week this week in Ottawa, so they're back in their constituencies. They're going to be talking to voters and Canadians about what they saw in the budget, and they'll come back and they'll decide. But writing yourself out of the story is never a great idea. So I think ultimately they'll want to support the things like help for renters and free birth control, pharmacare that they fought for so hard in the budget. So if I had to put money on it, I'd say they'd support it. But I think that deliberation is important.
Sabrina, the Liberals, as I kind of teed up in the introduction there, are hoping to get big mileage. And like I said, we've talked about this every time we've met over the last 3 weeks. Big mileage politically out of the budget in the form of seeing some change in the polls in the next few months, basically by the time they hit the barbecue circuit in the summer. Do you think that expectation, as the Globe reported it, is realistic for them?
I think that the way that they frame the budget, this idea of fairness for every generation is really important, because they are really attacking this idea of speaking to Gen Z and millennials with their announcements related to housing, related to things like birth control, related to housing. There's so much housing in this budget. But I think that they're also speaking to older generations, right? So to parents who fear that their kids might not have the same possibilities of a positive, growing, thriving life in Canada. And I think in particularly, they're speaking to women. The segment that they've lost that's been the most damaging after millennials and Gen Z has been middle-aged, middle-income women. And I think that, we see that the Liberals have a really good grasp on seniors, but how do they get those women back? I think it's by talking to them about their kids and about the lives that their kids can have. And you're seeing, just the fire back in the Liberals and the fire back in PMO on the communication standpoint. I've seen way more social media ads. I've seen more engaging videos. I've seen, way more runway on this budget than I've seen in any, statement before. And I think that that is a really positive impact. Will it get them a 15% bump? Maybe not, but I think setting a realistic 5% bump is maybe a little bit more within their reach.
It sounds like it should, Shakir, be within their reach, but even the little bump they had when they were kind of successfully using the issue of Ukraine against the Conservatives prior to Christmas was only a few points here and there, and it swung back pretty quickly. Do you think the expectation they've set is reasonable?
So I don't know if they have some intel on public perception or a crystal ball, but I just question the wisdom of making that internal target public, right? Because ultimately, if they don't get that 5% kind of bump, there's going to be follow-up questions about what's the consequences, what does this mean? Does it mean Trudeau's not going to be leader? And this is all happening. We're talking about Dominic LeBlanc organizing, and there are folks that are thinking about leadership aspirations as well. So I do question making that a public statement. That said, I agree with Sabrina a bit. They did a decent job pre-budget, owning that kind of cycle, getting things they want to focus on, talked about, and having the media report on it. But since budget day to today, I've just seen a lot of negative coverage, right, around specifically the tax measures and capital gains tax. They're trying to draw the conservatives into a fight, but the conservatives aren't even driving the opposition, right? These are just third-party stakeholders. It's an organic kind of movement against the liberals. And so if they want to get that 5% by July, I think they need to get back into this kind of media cycle and change the narrative. But right now, it's been a lot of negativity. I don't see them realistically getting that 5% bump that they're hoping for. And from what I've seen, and I know you've covered this more than I have, Ashley, but from what I've seen in budgets don't really move the needle that significantly in any way anyway. So I think it's a very unrealistic aspiration by the people in PMO. I just question why they would make that public.
Yeah, they don't normally move the needle, Laura, but in this case, I think their aim was to do it differently so that it does. The question is whether it will.
Yeah, I think it is slightly dangerous to put an exact number around how much they want the polls to move, because it does raise expectations. 5 points isn't exactly skyrocketing comeback or anything, but it does at least lay some sort of groundwork. Now, I don't know who the sources are. I don't know if it's someone overzealous, or I don't know who's talking, but it does set an expectation now for the Liberals. And I think clearly the government in this budget is trying to focus on issues that everyone cares about and want to see changed: housing, affordability. So maybe it's not specific to the budget per se, and they're just going to keep hammering these issues. They clearly do their own polling and just talk to people in their constituencies about concerns that they have. So they know what everyone's talking about. They know what needs to change. They understand the issues clearly. So maybe they think that by consistently talking about this message, consistently getting their initiatives out there of what they're going to change and what they're going to do, they can see this modest increase in the polls that they can sort of ride through the summer barbecue circuit. But by even kind of specifying what they want that bump to be, it does kind of set expectations. So even if it's 3%, I mean, that doesn't quite meet the target.